Russia's Su-35 pilot thought that he faced no danger. Far enough from the front to not have to deal with Ukraine's air defenses, or so he thought. That pilot felt like he could fly with impunity. Ukraine wasn't going to do anything. Even the best Ukrainian airframes can't survive a dogfight with an Su-35. All was going fine. Until it wasn't. Ukrainian F-16s have just humiliated the deadliest fighter jet that Russia regularly deploys in a genius move that will go down in the history books. Ukraine's F-16 pilots just found a whole new way to dominate. And one unfortunate Su-35 pilot was the first to find out how. Not that you would know that from the initial reporting of what happened. Ukraine itself was the first to reveal that an Su-35 was down. In a July 8th Telegram post, the Ukrainian Air Force announced that an Su-35 had been shot down in the eastern direction and that the victory was confirmed. Photographs from the site soon verified Ukraine's claim, showcasing the wreckage of the Russian fighter jet on the ground. Of course, Russia has lost Su-35s before. By June 2025, the visually confirmed count of destroyed Su-35s stood at 8, but there was something different this time around. Most of the Su-35s that Russia has lost so far have been the victims of drone strikes. However, the July 8th incident reportedly saw Russia's premier fighter jet get taken down by an airframe that shouldn't be able to face it one-on-one in a dogfight, a Ukrainian F-16. It wasn't long after the Ukrainian Air Force's announcement that the Su-35 YouTube channel published a breakdown of what had happened. And in a July 8th video, Su-35 reported that Russia's Su-35 had been shot down in an air-to-air duel. This wasn't a drone sneaking up and taking the fighter jet out. It wasn't Ukrainian air defenses unleashing a missile that the Su-35 pilot couldn't escape. There was a dogfight involved, and it pitted at least one Ukrainian F-16 against a Russian Su-35. There is a twist to the tale, and we just gave you a little clue there. Stick with us and we'll reveal all. Further confirmation of Russia's Su-35 loss has come from Russia. Not from the Defense Ministry or the Kremlin, of course. Neither is going to want anything to do with publicizing the fact that Russia has just lost an Su-35 in the type of aerial duel that it's supposed to be capable of winning. Rather, the confirmation comes from a military commentator named Alexei Zemtsov, who is a Russian military blogger. Zemtsov confirmed that the wreckage we saw in the footage we shared earlier was indeed an Su-35, and he added the extra detail that the pilot supposedly survived Ukraine's attack and somehow managed to drag himself back to Russian-occupied territory. How true that claim is remains to be seen, but the only thing we knew for sure at the time of the initial reporting was that an Su-35 was down. How it happened, outside of the confirmation that an F-16 was involved, was still very much in the air. This wasn't supposed to happen to Russia. But then the complete failure of Russia's air force to impose its will on Ukraine has been evident from the very beginning of the war. As of July 10th, Russia has lost 437 planes and 353 helicopters to Ukraine, many of which were taken out during the first weeks of the invasion, when Russia was arrogant enough to believe that Ukraine didn't have the air defenses needed to stop them. That was soon proven wrong, and Russia has spent most of the war engaged in a strategy where it keeps its aircraft behind the front, from where they can launch missiles and glide bombs against Ukraine at a safe distance. That strategy hasn't stopped Ukraine from scoring wins. On June 26th, Russia lost one of its MiG-29 fighter jets to a Ukrainian strike at Crimea's Belbek airfield. Russia is also starting to run low on its Su-35 stockpiles. We mentioned earlier that at least 8 were confirmed to have been destroyed prior to Ukraine's latest takedown. The last known delivery of this aircraft to Russia's military took place in November 2025 and appears to have been a batch of between 15 and 18. The year before, Russia received another 15 Su-35s. It's difficult to see whether more are coming, but Ukraine has been whittling down the stockpiles. Now, another Su-35 is down. And just like Russia's overall failure to leverage its superior air power in Ukraine, the loss of this Su-35 in the air to an F-16 wasn't supposed to happen. Let's assume that this was the one-on-one air-to-air duel that was initially reported for a moment. In that sort of situation, and assuming an equal level of competence between the Ukrainian and Russian pilots, the Su-35 should come out on top. Popular Mechanics has the numbers. Though both the F-16 and Su-35 are fourth-generation fighter jets, the latter is more modern, having debuted in 2016. The F-16 is an airframe that dates back to the 1970s. Both have a comparable top speed of about Mach 2 at altitude, but the big difference, and what should be the winner for an Su-35 pilot, is combat range. An F-16 has a combat range of about 925 kilometers. An Su-35 has a combat range of almost 1,600 kilometers. That should give the Su-35 pilot more range to maneuver into position, assuming their aircraft's onboard radars and sensors detect the F-16 in enough time. But there's more to it than that. Strassam adds that the Su-35 has more flexibility than the F-16 when it comes to nozzle movement. Both of the Su-35's nozzles can move 360 degrees, with each moving on different axes. What this means is that the Su-35 can pull off the Cobra maneuver, which sees it essentially hover in place in mid-air. The F-16 can't do that. In a dogfight where the Western airframe is trying to chase down the Su-35, this clever move allows the Russian fighter to come to a stop, potentially leading the F-16 flying right past it to give the Su-35 pilot the advantage. None of this necessarily means that an F-16 can't defeat an Su-35. However, the F-16 would have to rely on support from AWACS to get a bead on where the Su-35 is ahead of time, as well as air-to-air missiles such as the AMRAAM, which can be fired from beyond visual range, allowing the F-16 to ambush the Su-35 rather than get dragged into a straight dogfight. In short, the Su-35 is supposed to have an advantage over the F-16, but Russia's fighter jet lost in what has been described as an air-to-air duel. How? The answer is that it wasn't a straight dogfight. It was a masterclass in Ukrainian strategy that forced Russia's fighter jet pilot to fly his Su-35 right into a trap of Ukraine's making. But before we reveal how Ukraine managed to pull this off, this is a reminder that you're watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's the perfect time to hit the button before we get back to the video. It's a Ukrainian journalist named Ivan Yakovina who believes that he has figured out how Ukraine managed to score a victory that it wasn't ever supposed to be able to score with its F-16s. Drawing on reports from Russian sources, Yakovina says that Ukraine managed to lure Russia's Su-35 pilot into an ambush, where the fighter jet was attacked with missiles launched from both the air and from the ground. The plan was risky, the journalist claims. The Ukrainian F-16 pilot would have had to get within visual range of the Su-35, using the F-16 as bait to lure the Russian pilot into thinking they could engage in a straight dogfight. Then the F-16 blew as fast as it could, evading the Su-35's attempts to attack until the Russian pilot ended up at the ambush site. By that point, it would be too late. What would have looked like an easy victory for the Russian pilot to score was quickly turned into a defeat. Visions of medals being awarded and Putin calling the pilot a hero of Russia would have been quickly replaced by panic as the Su-35 hurtled toward the ground. This was a brilliant plan by Ukraine that reportedly involved several F-16s and even a Patriot air defense system. And shockingly, it wasn't just Ukraine's trap that led to the downfall of the Su-35 pilot. That pilot was betrayed by his own country, setting up the entire situation in the first place. That betrayal happened unintentionally, but it was the result of Russian lies that we've been seeing throughout the war coming back to bite the pilot of one of the country's most effective airframes. But before we explain what all of that means, there are more details about Ukraine's brilliant trap to cover. In its report on Ukraine's genius gambit, Euromaidan Press reveals that the various Russian sources that have uncovered Ukraine's trap believe that Ukraine used a trio of F-16s to lure the Su-35 into the ambush. If that turns out to be true, then Ukraine took a big risk. Ukraine has been pledged about 80 F-16s, though half of those have yet to arrive due to various delays among its pilots. Losing up to 3 in an attempt to trap an Su-35 would have been a major blow to Ukraine's air force, not to mention the likely loss of 3 talented pilots that would have gone along with it. Still, the F-16s flew, tempting the Su-35 into chases as the Ukrainian aircraft drew closer to the ambush spot, and what was awaiting at the location, a Patriot air defense system. From having the advantage, the Su-35 pilot ended up with a Herculean and impossible task on his hands. At this point, the story gets murky. Some claim that the Ukrainian jets and the Patriot all fired on the Su-35. Others, including Euromaidan Press, say that it isn't clear which of Ukraine's systems fired, only that whichever it was, it forced the Su-35 pilot to eject and run for the hills. Regardless, this trap shows an unbelievable level of coordination between air defense teams on the ground and pilots in the sky. In our opinion, it seems most likely that it was the F-16s that fired on Russia's Su-35 rather than the Patriot system. Why? Well, 2 reasons. First, Ukraine has a very well-known Patriot missile shortage, and it needs to keep every single missile that it has in its arsenal for use against Russia's ballistic missiles. In fact, the Atlantic Council reports that Russia has escalated its ballistic missile strikes precisely because it knows that Ukraine is suffering from a Patriot shortage. As big a scalp as an Su-35 is for Ukraine to claim, it's not more important than ensuring that Russia's missile strikes do as little damage as possible. And when you have F-16s in the sky armed with missiles that can take the Su-35 down, there is even less reason to expend a Patriot interceptor to take down the Su-35. Yakovina appears to agree with this assessment. He says, "Judging by the fact that the Russian pilot survived, at least that's what the Russians say, it's likely the plane was hit. I can't guarantee it 100%, but it was most likely not a Patriot missile that hit it. I'll explain why. This missile is very large, creating a gigantic explosion with a cloud of metal balls that turns both the plane and its pilot into a sieve. Surviving such an explosion is simply impossible." Second, the Patriot system appears to have a very clear role that it could have played in the ambush that Ukraine set up. As Euromaidan Press points out, Ukraine's F-16s lack the missiles and radars needed to make them a match for the missiles and radars installed in an Su-35. But when you throw a Patriot air defense system and its radars into the mix, you get a very different story. What we believe has happened is that the Ukrainian F-16s have flown within range of the Su-35's radars, but far enough away to minimize risk. On the ground, the Patriot air defense system's radar has tracked the Su-35, and that data has been transmitted to the F-16 pilots in real time, so they know where to fly to keep the Su-35 moving toward the trap without the Russian pilot being able to shoot any of the F-16s down. Then once the Patriot detected that the Su-35 was in the perfect position, the order was given: fire. Euromaidan Press presents another possibility. It points out that Ukraine has been using its F-16s to accompany other airframes that launch glide bombs at Russian positions in the near rear. To do that, the F-16s have to maintain a low flight profile as they approach the Russian position. What may have happened is that one of Ukraine's F-16s flew this flight profile, though it wasn't accompanying a glide bomb launcher. Instead, the F-16 was the bait used to tempt the Russian Su-35 out to prevent what seemed like it was going to be a glide bomb attack. As the Su-35 attempted to go on the attack, the other two F-16s, flying much higher than both the initial F-16 and the Su-35, launched AIM-120 radar-guided missiles to take out the Russian fighter jet from above. In this scenario, the Patriot would have still been providing real-time data, likely to let the two F-16 pilots waiting in ambush know when the time had come to strike. There are many possibilities here. As you would expect, Ukraine is keeping everything hush-hush. Why would it give away the specifics of the strategy that it used when there's a possibility that it could be used again in the future? After all, Ukraine has made its glide bombs a constant threat to the Russian rear. Now it seems to have a strategy that takes advantage of this fact, which it can use to tempt Russian pilots out for a fight that those pilots stand no chance of winning. But there is one more twist to this tale. Earlier we mentioned a certain betrayal had taken place. As unintentional as that betrayal may have been, it may have ended up being the reason why Russia's Su-35 ended up in the lethal position that it found itself in. And the ultimate irony here is that Russia's own desire to make itself seem as strong as possible is what has led to one of its best fighter jets being shot out of the sky. The Su-35 pilot was operating using inaccurate maps. And those maps were inaccurate because Russia had created them to exaggerate its battlefield gains against Ukraine. At least that's according to a July 9th United 24 media report, which says that the Su-35 crash site was around 42 kilometers away from the front lines of the war. That's a lot closer than most Russian Su-35s get to the front due to the risk of being shot down by air defense systems. What seems to have happened here is that Russia's exaggerated claims of its gains, as reflected on the maps provided to the Su-35 pilot, have led that pilot into believing they were flying in a relatively safe zone, rather than straight into the mouth of the trap that Ukraine had created for him. As the Ukraine Control Map X account put it, they probably thought they were further from the front using Russian maps, once again hoisted by their own MOD's petard. What a way to find out that your country has been lying about its success in Ukraine. After ejecting and watching your multi-million-dollar airframe crash, you get the news that all of this could have been avoided if it wasn't for Putin's massive ego, or desire for delusion, needing to be soothed. Of course, anybody who has been paying attention to Russia's claims know that the exaggeration of battlefield gains is far from new. Putin wants to hold as much leverage over Ukraine as possible in peace discussions, so lying about where the front line is located serves his purposes. In November 2025, Medusa reported that a former Russian military cartographer had blasted the maps that Russia is creating as total nonsense, as he accused commanders of cooking the maps to exaggerate gains. The Institute for the Study of War has made the same claim as recently as May 2026, noting that it has found no evidence of a slew of gains Russia claimed to have made in May, suggesting that Russia is pretending that sneaking an infiltrator or two into a Ukrainian position is equivalent to taking that position over altogether. And even the commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Oleksandr Syrskyi, says that Russian commanders create fake maps so they can please the top command, including Putin. Syrskyi added that this is good for Ukraine. It means Russia's military is operating using false information. On July 8th, the Russian Su-35 pilot may have just found out how damaging Putin's need to be told that Russia is advancing can truly be. Whether the map story is true or not, Ukraine has just sent a very timely reminder to Russia. Even the best Russian fighter jets aren't safe if they get within 50 kilometers of the front. So much danger awaits. In this case, it was a brilliantly coordinated ambush that seems to have taken advantage of Russia's high command's lies. Next time it may be a drone or an air defense missile that shoots a Russian jet out of the sky. This is why Russia can't make its much larger air force count in its invasion. Ukraine is just too damn good at dealing with everything that Russia tries to throw at it. And Ukraine also has the capacity to go from brilliant to brutal in a heartbeat. And in many cases it mixes the two. That's precisely what we've discovered Ukraine has done when it revealed Operation Ashan. A multi-month operation started in 2025 and carried out right under Russian noses without anybody being the wiser. Ashan shattered Russia's artillery and set the stage for much of the success that Ukraine experienced in 2026. We have all of the details you need to know, so check out our video to learn more. And if you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell. There's a lot more where this comes from, right here on The Military Show. And thank you, as always, for watching.